I told my wife if I caught one more lie about that man, I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't yell, I'd simply disappear from her life like she never existed. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You don't have the guts." That was the last time she ever underestimated me. My name is Marcus Ashford. I'm 52 years old, and for the past 23 years, I've worked as a forensic accountant for one of the largest investigation firms in Chicago. My job is simple on paper. I follow the money. Corporations hire us when someone is stealing, lying, or hiding assets. I've traced embezzlement schemes across 14 countries, uncovered fraud buried under 7 layers of shell companies, and helped the FBI dismantle a money laundering network that moved $300 million through fake charities. When numbers don't add up, I find out why. I'm very, very good at what I do. Unfortunately, I spent 20 years being very, very bad at seeing what was happening in my own house. My wife Serena and I met when we were both 29. She was working as an interior designer for a boutique firm in Lincoln Park, and I'd been hired to audit one of their clients. She was magnetic, the kind of woman who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 5 new friends and a dinner invitation. I was the opposite, quiet, methodical, the guy at the party doing math in his head while everyone else was dancing. Somehow, she saw something in me worth loving. We built a good life. A brownstone in Wicker Park that Serena redesigned 3 times because she could never stop improving things. A daughter, Chloe, now 24 and working as a data analyst in Denver. A son, Nathan, 21 and finishing his engineering degree at Purdue. From the outside, we were the couple people envied. Stable, successful, still holding hands at our kids' college orientations. The cracks started showing about 8 months before everything collapsed. Serena had landed what she called her biggest project ever, a full renovation of a lakefront estate in Lake Forest for a private client named Lucas Hargrove. The project required constant site visits, she told me. Meetings with contractors that ran late. Design consultations that somehow always happened over dinner. Lucas has incredible taste, Serena said one evening, scrolling through photos on her tablet. He understands that great design isn't about money, it's about vision. Most clients don't get that. I noticed she said his first name like she was tasting something sweet. When do I get to meet this visionary client? I asked. Serena didn't look up. Oh, Lucas is very private. He doesn't really do social events. Besides, you'd be bored. All we talk about is tile patterns and lighting fixtures. But I wasn't bored. I was paying attention. 23 years of investigating fraud had taught me to recognize the early warning signs, the subtle changes in behavior that people think nobody notices. Serena had started working out more. She'd bought new clothes, expensive ones, the kind she used to say were impractical for a woman who spends half her day at construction sites. She was guarding her phone like it contained state secrets, always turning the screen away when I walked by, always putting it face down on the counter. And she was lying about small things. Tuesday, she told me she was meeting a fabric supplier downtown. But our shared calendar, the one she'd forgotten I still had access to, showed nothing. Wednesday, she came home at 9:30 claiming traffic on the expressway, but her car's GPS history showed she'd been parked in Lake Forest since 4 in the afternoon. I didn't confront her. Confrontation is an amateur move. In my profession, you never let the subject know you're investigating until you've already built an airtight case. You gather, you document, you verify. Then you present your findings when the other side has no room left to maneuver. That Thursday night, I was reviewing case files in my home office when Serena knocked on the door. She was dressed in a silk robe, hair freshly done, wearing perfume I'd never smelled before. Marcus, can we talk? I closed my laptop. Of course. She sat on the edge of the desk, which she never did, and gave me a smile that felt rehearsed. Lucas invited me to a design conference in Miami next month. 4 days, all expenses paid. He says it would be great exposure for my portfolio. A 4-day trip with your client. It's professional development, Marcus. Several other designers will be there. Which conference? I'll look it up. The pause was barely a second, but in my line of work, a 1-second pause might as well be a signed confession. I'd have to check my email for the exact name. Something about coastal contemporary design. I'll send you the details. She never sent the details. I looked at her, this woman I'd loved for 23 years, the mother of my children, the person I'd trusted with everything, and I said it calmly, clearly, the way I deliver findings in a deposition. Serena, I'm going to say this once. If I find out you're lying to me about this man, about where you've been, about what's really going on, I won't fight. I won't beg. I'll simply remove myself from your life so completely, you'll wonder if I was ever here at all. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she laughed. Not nervously, not awkwardly, genuinely laughed, like I'd told her the funniest joke she'd heard all year. You don't have the guts, she said, shaking her head. Marcus, you've never made a spontaneous decision in your life. You analyze everything to death. By the time you decided to leave me, we'd both be in nursing homes. She kissed my forehead like I was a child she found adorable but harmless and walked out of the room. That was November 14th. I remember the date because it's the same day I opened a new case file on my personal laptop. Client. Myself. Subject. Serena Ashford. Allegation, fraud, deception, and breach of trust. If my wife wanted to see what a forensic accountant looked like when he turned his skills inward, she was about to get a masterclass. The first 72 hours were pure intelligence gathering. I accessed our shared cloud account, the one Serena used to back up her design photos. She'd never changed the default settings, which meant every picture she took on her phone automatically uploaded. Most people forget this. The same woman who locked her phone with a 6-digit code was broadcasting her life to a server I could access from my desk. The photos told a story that made my chest tight. Serena and Lucas at a restaurant I didn't recognize, not a professional lunch, but a candlelit dinner with wine glasses and his hand covering hers. Serena in what appeared to be a bedroom that wasn't ours, standing by a window in a bathrobe, smiling at whoever was holding the camera. A selfie of both of them in a car, her head on his shoulder, timestamp showing a Wednesday afternoon when she'd told me she was at a plumbing supply showroom. Then I did what I do professionally. I followed the money. Our joint credit card statements showed nothing unusual. Serena was smart enough not to charge romantic dinners to our shared account. But she had a personal card, one she'd opened 3 years ago for business expenses. I'd never paid much attention to it. Now I pulled the statements through a financial monitoring service I had access to through work. The pattern was immediate and damning. $200 at a spa in Highland Park same day. Lucas posted a photo from that location on his Instagram. $350 at a jewelry store in Northbrook, but no new jewelry had appeared at home. A recurring monthly charge of $480 to something called Hargrove Creative Ventures, LLC. That last one stopped me cold. My wife was paying money to her lover's company, not the other way around. She was supposed to be working for him, billing him for design services. Instead, she was sending him $500 a month for a service I couldn't identify. This wasn't just an affair. Something else was happening. I called my old colleague from the bureau, Special Agent Patricia Dominguez. Pat and I had worked together on the Midwest charity fraud case 4 years earlier, and she owed me more than a few favors. Pat, I need a background check. Deep dive. Name is Lucas Hargrove. Claims to be in real estate development, Lake Forest area. Personal or professional? Both. And Pat, this one's close to home. She didn't ask for details. In our world, that phrase tells you everything you need to know. Pat's report arrived 48 hours later in an encrypted file. What I read made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Lucas Hargrove was real, that was his actual name. But the lakefront estate wasn't his. It belonged to a trust registered in Delaware, and Hargrove was listed as the property manager, not the owner. His design project was cover. The man had no background in real estate development, no contractor licenses, no legitimate business history. What he did have was a trail of women. 4 that Pat could confirm. All married, all upper middle class, all connected to him through some creative or professional context. An art teacher in Portland, a wine consultant in Scottsdale, a yoga instructor in Charleston. Each relationship followed the same playbook: charm the wife, isolate her from her husband, get her emotionally dependent, then gradually entangle her financially through fake business ventures and investment opportunities. 2 of the women had lost significant savings, one over $60,000, the other nearly $100,000. Neither had pressed charges because they were too humiliated to admit what had happened. The yoga instructor's husband had tried to file a complaint, but without his wife's cooperation, the case went nowhere. Lucas Hargrove wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was running a long-term financial exploitation scheme, and Serena was his latest target. The $480 monthly payment to his LLC was probably just the beginning. The Miami conference was likely the next phase, getting her away from home, deepening the emotional dependency, then escalating the financial requests. I sat in my office for a long time after reading that report. The anger was there, but underneath it was something colder and more focused. I'd spent my career dismantling exactly this kind of predator. They succeed because they understand human psychology, because they exploit emotional vulnerability and shame. They count on their victims being too embarrassed to fight back. They had never encountered someone who fights fraud for a living. I made 3 phone calls that night. The first was to my attorney, David Chin, the best divorce lawyer in Cook County. David was expensive and ruthless, which is exactly what you want when your marriage is about to become a legal battlefield. I need asset protection immediately, I told him. Full financial separation, trust restructuring, the works. And David, I need it done quietly. She can't know until I'm ready. The second call was to my daughter Chloe. I debated whether to involve her, but Chloe had a right to know. She was also the beneficiary of educational trusts I'd established when she was born, and those needed to be restructured before Serena could touch them. Dad, are you sure? Chloe asked, her voice tight. I've seen the evidence, sweetheart. The photos, the financial records, the background check. This isn't a suspicion, it's a documented case. Chloe was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that reminded me she was more my daughter than her mother's. What do you need me to do? The third call was to Jerome Whitfield, a private investigator I'd collaborated with on corporate cases. Jerome was a former Secret Service agent with surveillance skills that bordered on artistic. If Lucas Hargrove thought he could operate in shadows, he'd never dealt with someone who'd once tracked counterfeiters across 3 continents. I need full documentation, I told Jerome. Photos, video, audio if possible. I need to catch them together, and I need to document his financial operation. Timeline? My wife is leaving for Miami with him in 3 weeks. I want everything locked down before she boards that plane. Understood. I'll start tomorrow. Over the next 17 days, I executed a strategy that would have impressed my partners at the firm. Every morning, I kissed Serena goodbye and went to work like nothing had changed. Every evening, I came home, asked about her day, nodded at her lies, and retreated to my office to review the mounting evidence. Jerome was extraordinary. Within a week, he documented Serena visiting Lucas's property 11 times, including 3 overnight stays when she'd told me she was at a design expo in Milwaukee. He photographed them at restaurants, in his car, walking along the lakefront with the easy intimacy of people who'd stopped pretending they were anything other than lovers. But Jerome's most valuable contribution was the financial intelligence. He'd managed to photograph documents on Lucas's desk during a visit posing as a potential real estate client. Those documents showed Lucas was operating a classic affinity fraud, using his relationships with wealthy women to create fake investment vehicles, collecting management fees, and slowly draining their accounts through a web of shell companies. Serena had already invested $12,000 in what Lucas called a design collective, a company that existed only on paper. The Miami trip wasn't a conference. It was a setup to get her to commit to a larger investment, probably $50,000 or more, that Lucas would funnel through his network and she'd never see again. Meanwhile, David Chin was quietly restructuring our finances with the precision of a surgeon. My retirement accounts, the children's trusts, our real estate holdings, everything was being legally repositioned so that by the time Serena realized what was happening, the assets I'd spent 23 years building would be completely beyond her reach. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being strategic. Serena had chosen to align herself with a predator, and I wasn't going to let that predator access a single dollar of what I'd earned. The night before Serena's Miami trip, she was almost manic with excitement. She'd packed 3 suitcases for a 4-day trip, bought a new swimsuit, and spent 2 hours doing her hair. She was humming while she packed, the way she used to hum when we were first dating and everything felt electric and new. "I'll miss you," she said, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Maybe when I get back, we can plan something together, just the 2 of us." I looked at this woman, still beautiful, still capable of making my heart ache, and I felt something close to grief. Not for the marriage, which had been dying longer than I wanted to admit, but for the version of Serena I'd fallen in love with. The version that wouldn't have fallen for a con man's cheap tricks. Have a wonderful time, I said. Learn a lot. She flew out of O'Hare at 7:15 the next morning. At 7:45, I was on the phone with the FBI. Pat Dominguez had been building her own case against Lucas Hargrove for the past 2 weeks, using my evidence as a springboard. The other victim's reluctance to cooperate had stalled previous investigations, but my documentation, financial records, surveillance footage, the shell company paperwork Jerome had photographed gave the Bureau everything they needed. We're executing a search warrant on the Lake Forest property this afternoon, Pat told me. And Marcus were coordinating with Miami-Dade. They'll pick up Hargrove at his hotel tonight. My wife? She's not a target. She's a victim, whether she knows it yet or not. I spent that day at the office, reviewing quarterly reports and attending meetings with perfect composure. My colleagues had no idea that their forensic accounting partner was simultaneously dismantling a fraud operation and ending his own marriage. At 3:15, Pat texted, "Search warrant executed. You won't believe what we found." I didn't call back. I didn't need to know the details yet. What I needed was to prepare for the phone call I knew was coming. It came at 9:47 that evening. Serena's number, lighting up my screen. Marcus. Her voice was barely a whisper. Something happened. The FBI, they came to the hotel. They arrested Lucas. They took everything, his phone, his computer, his documents. They're saying he's a criminal, that he defrauded people. I let the silence stretch. Marcus, are you there? I'm here. Did you know about this? Did you have something to do with this? Come home, Serena. We need to talk. Marcus, please. Tell me you didn't. Come home. She caught the first flight out of Miami the next morning. I could track her phone. She'd never disabled the family location sharing, and I watched the little blue dot move from the airport to Lakeshore Drive to our street. She sat in her car for 14 minutes before coming inside. I was waiting at the kitchen table with 3 folders arranged in front of me. The kitchen where we'd cooked Thanksgiving dinners and helped our kids with homework and slow danced to jazz on Saturday mornings. It seemed like the right place to end things. Serena walked in looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. No makeup, hair pulled back, still wearing the clothes she'd flown in. She sat across from me and stared at the folders. What are those? The first folder contains surveillance photographs documenting your affair with Lucas Hargrove over the past 7 months. Dates, times, locations. The second folder contains financial records showing $12,000 you transferred to his fraudulent company, plus additional credit card charges totaling approximately $8,000 gifts, hotels, dinners you told me were business expenses. Serena's face had gone white. The third folder, I continued, contains divorce papers. David Chin prepared them. The terms are straightforward and, under the circumstances, generous. Marcus, you don't understand. Lucas manipulated me. He made me believe. I know exactly what he did. I opened the second folder and slid Pat's background report across the table. Lucas Hargrove has targeted at least 4 other married women using the same techniques. He identifies emotionally vulnerable targets, establishes a professional connection, creates intimacy through shared creative interests, isolates them from their spouses, and then gradually introduces financial entanglement. It's a textbook affinity fraud wrapped in a romance scam. Serena stared at the report. I could see her processing the names of the other women, recognizing the pattern, understanding for the first time that her great love story was actually a con artist's playbook. He told me you were controlling, she whispered. He said I deserved someone who appreciated my creativity, my passion. He said you were suffocating me with your spreadsheets and your routines. That's called isolation. It's step 3 in his process. Make the husband look like the villain so the wife runs further into the arms of the predator. She started crying. Not the dramatic sobbing I'd expected, but quiet tears that rolled down her face while she sat perfectly still. I was so stupid. You were targeted by a professional. Feeling stupid is part of how the scam works. It keeps victims from reporting it because they're ashamed. But Serena, understanding that you were manipulated doesn't change the fact that you made choices. You chose to lie to me, repeatedly and deliberately. You chose to mock me when I tried to warn you. You looked me in the face and said I didn't have the guts to leave. The silence in the kitchen was heavy enough to touch. What happens now? She asked. You sign the papers. You keep what you brought into the marriage plus a fair settlement that the court would consider appropriate given the circumstances. The house transfers to a trust for Chloe and Nathan. You have 60 days to find new living arrangements. And if I don't sign? I close the folder. Then we go to court, where Jerome's surveillance footage, your financial records, Lucas's recorded confessions, and my 23 years of forensic accounting expertise will be entered into evidence. David Chin has never lost a contested divorce case. I'd recommend signing. Serena picked up the papers. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold them. She read through the first page, then the second, then set them down. Can I at least talk to the kids first? Chloe already knows. She's known for 2 weeks. Nathan will be told this weekend. They'll form their own opinions in their own time. That was the part that broke her. Not the money, not the house, not even the humiliation of falling for a con artist. It was knowing that her daughter had watched her mother's betrayal unfold in real time and chosen to stand with her father. Serena signed the papers that evening. She moved out the following Tuesday, taking her personal belongings, her design portfolio, and the Honda she'd driven to every secret meeting with Lucas Hargrove. I stood at the window and watched her pull away from the curb, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just the strange lightness of a man who's finally set down a weight he didn't realize he'd been carrying. 4 months later, I was sitting on the deck of a cabin I'd rented in Door County, Wisconsin, reviewing case files while the sun set over Green Bay. My life had found a new rhythm, quieter, simpler, built around work I found meaningful and relationships I could trust. The Hargrove case had made national news. Pat Dominguez and her team had uncovered a fraud network spanning 6 states, with Lucas at the center and over $2 million in stolen funds. He'd pleaded guilty to 12 counts of wire fraud and was facing 8 to 12 years in federal prison. 4 of his victims had come forward after seeing the coverage, and 2 more cases were being investigated. Chloe drove up from Denver for a long weekend, bringing her boyfriend Ryan, a quiet software engineer who reminded me of a younger version of myself. Dad. Mom called me again, Chloe said as we grilled steaks on the deck. She wants to have lunch. She says she's in therapy and she's working on understanding what happened. That's between you and her, sweetheart. I won't tell you what kind of relationship to have with your mother. She asked about you too. Whether you're seeing anyone. I shook my head. I'm seeing a lot of financial statements and a very persistent base that lives under the dock. That's enough company for now. Nathan had taken the news harder than Clue. He'd always been closer to his mother, and learning about the affair had shaken his understanding of the family he'd grown up in. We talked every Sunday, careful, honest conversations where I answered his questions without editorializing and let him process his feelings at his own pace. He was coming around, slowly, in the way that young men do when they realize their parents are complicated humans capable of terrible decisions. Serena, from what I heard through Chloe, was renting a small apartment in Evanston and working for a design firm at a fraction of her previous income. The $12,000 she'd given Lucas was gone. Her professional reputation had taken a hit when news of the case circulated through Chicago's design community. She was rebuilding, but the foundation she'd destroyed was going to take years to replace. My firm had offered me a promotion senior partner, heading up a new division focused on romance fraud investigation. It turned out my personal experience had given me insights that traditional forensic accountants lacked. I understood the emotional mechanics of these scams now, not just the financial ones. I knew how intelligent, successful people could be systematically dismantled by someone who understood their vulnerabilities. I accepted the position. The work felt purposeful in a way that corporate fraud investigation never had. Every case I took was someone's marriage, someone's life savings, someone's dignity. I couldn't fix my own situation, but I could make sure fewer people ended up where I'd been. Jerome stopped by the cabin on his way to a fishing trip in the Upper Peninsula. We sat on the dock drinking beer and watching the water turn gold in the late afternoon light. Got a call from the U.S. Attorney's Office, Jerome said. They want to use your documentation methods as a training template for domestic fraud cases. Apparently, your evidence gathering was the cleanest they've ever seen in a civilian investigation. 23 years of practice. You ever think about what would have happened if you just confronted her that night? When she laughed at you? I thought about it. The old Marcus, the one who wanted to believe the best about his wife, who would have accepted her lies because the alternative was too painful, that Marcus would have argued, pleaded, maybe even forgiven. And Lucas Hargrove would have continued his operation, draining Serena's accounts and moving on to the next target, leaving a trail of destroyed families behind him. She said I didn't have the guts, I replied. Turns out, she was confusing patience with weakness. Most people do. Jerome raised his bottle. To patience, to evidence. We clinked bottles and sat in comfortable silence while the sun dropped below the tree line and the first stars appeared over the bay. A year after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, an actual handwritten letter, mailed to my office at the firm. The return address was Serena's apartment in Evanston. I almost threw it away. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. But curiosity is an occupational hazard for investigators, so I opened it. It was 2 pages, written in the careful handwriting Serena used for her design presentations. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. She didn't make excuses. She wrote about therapy, about understanding the patterns that made her vulnerable to manipulation, the need for external validation, the restlessness she'd mistaken for her marriage being broken when really it was something inside herself that needed fixing. The last paragraph said, "You warned me, and I laughed. I told you that you didn't have the guts. I was wrong about everything, Marcus, but I was most wrong about you. You are the strongest person I've ever known, and I'm sorry it took losing you to see it." I read the letter twice, then put it in my desk drawer. Not because I was saving it for sentimental reasons, but because it was evidence. Evidence that even the people who underestimate you the most can eventually recognize what they lost. The next morning, I drove to the office, poured my coffee, and opened the first case file of the day. A woman in Milwaukee whose husband had discovered she was sending money to a man she'd met through an online art community. The pattern was familiar. The playbook hadn't changed. But this time, someone who knew exactly how the game worked was on the other side of the table. And I had all the patience in the world.